New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth. To live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge. On the growing edge.
And now, here's Allie.
Hello and welcome to Growing Edge Live. I'm Allie Benjamin, and it is my great joy and pleasure to host Growing Edge Live. And here at Growing Edge Live, we're all about conversations, meeting people. And so we have these chats every week, and you can watch live like you may be doing right now. Or you can listen to the podcast, which always drops the following Monday. We talk to soul-centered individuals that are channeling their time, their love, their resources into doing good works in the world. And so you can listen to these. I have a wonderful library of shows that you can peruse and hear from people from all walks of life that are using their lives to support others, to inspire others, and to help people heal. And so I'm so grateful that you're here. And we have another beautiful soul guest today, Marty Bacher. And Marty has been a friend of mine for many years. We're colleagues. There he is. And I'm going to read his bio because he is venturing into a whole new journey in his life. And Marty has had nearly 40 years of experience as a spiritual teacher, speaker, healer, and facilitator, assisting individuals and teams to find their passion, clarify their mission, and live with purpose. Marty has spent most of his career as a minister, teaching new thought principles of spiritual healing and manifestation. And as a lifelong student of metaphysics, his life and teachings were further transformed by studying and incorporating the heroic journey, a universal story which Joseph Campbell has documented as a lifelong student of metaphysics by combining tarot and the heroic journey and universal spiritual principles. Tarot Journeys is the culmination of his career as a spiritual teacher and counselor. So Marty Bacher, welcome to Growing Edge Live.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. So we just got a little glimpse of your website that was just popped up. And so here we go. Become the hero of your adventure using the power of myth and the symbology of tarot. Each of us is on a heroic journey. Beautiful. So we're going to get to your hero's journey and this beautiful new website and everything that you're doing and talk about that in a while. But I'd really love people to know who you are. Where did you come from? How did it all start? Did you grow up with this sense of the mystical or a servant heart to support others? How did it all start for you?
Oh, geez. That's right after the earth cooled. I grew up in a wonderful home, and it was a very traditional and, in my opinion, limiting Christian background. And while I loved the words of Jesus and the red letter parts, I felt limited by this idea that only some of us get to go to heaven. And I always felt like there was one God. And so aren't all religions, organizations talking about the same thing? That belief has been with me for as long as I can remember. And so at 10, we stopped going to church because my parents divorced. So that was kind of the silver lining of that divorce, was we didn't have to do that anymore. And I vowed right then and there to never go to church again, which didn't work out so well because I ended up spending a life in ministry. But sometimes the things we say never to are the things that absolutely show up in our life. But I found my way through trial and through crises of knowing I needed to find a better way to deal with my life. And that led me to go into a New Thought church. And I've always had a servant's heart. I've always, so I signed up to help out with the kids program because I thought that'd be fun. I've always loved kids, and that really did change my life. And before I know it, I was traveling in a bus across the country with 10 screaming teenagers, hormonal teenagers, and loving it, taking cold showers and sleeping in bad beds, but camp, and just really found that passion for serving others. That led my entry into ministry. And then, I've been doing some form of ministry for nearly 40 years now, which is quite amazing.
Wow. Yeah. I seem to recollect because when we met, you were serving at the Salt Lake Center in Utah, Salt Lake Center for Spiritual Living. And I think I remember hearing 20 years. And then now it's so much more. I'm like, wow, we've known each other a long time.
A long, long time.
A long time. So things have changed for you since you left the Salt Lake Center. But backing up a minute, where was your first church? Where did you first serve?
So when I went through sort of this crisis, which we'll talk about supreme ordeals later, but I knew I needed to find a better way. And so a friend invited me to this church that she went to. And of course I didn't do church, but for some reason I said, go, and walked into this environment of joy and happiness and people hugging and clapping and carrying on like they weren't in church. And and the minister at one point in the prayer said, "We bless all priests, all rabbis, all ministers and teachers of every faith. For we know there's one God and honor the many pathways to its understanding." I was like, oh my God. So I subsequently, I got very involved in that organization, and then was planning on going into ministry, and found my way to California, a place I said I'd never live, to do something I said I'd never do. And so there it is. But my first ministry was in Dallas, Texas. And I've always seemed to be attracted to go to places of conservative values, to be kind of a liberal light.
Hence Utah too, right?
Yeah, Utah, Idaho.
So Texas, so you served there for a period of time. Then where did life take you?
So I took a church for a couple of years in Dallas, and then I was invited to start a new ministry, which is a nice way of saying I got fired, and started a new ministry. Was there for about 7 years, and then went to Oklahoma City, and then decided I would move into a different form of that. My partner and I moved to Sun Valley, Idaho, and so I got to be the minister's spouse for a while, and then helped start a couple of organizations and did some consulting work. And then part of the consulting work was in Salt Lake City. I was living in Sun Valley, Idaho, and ended up taking that church for quite some, 7 years or something like that. And commuting for the first 3 or 4 years from Idaho that was crazy, but it was wonderful actually in many ways. So, I often say my card in the tarot deck is the Fool, which kind of just says, what cliff, jump, see what happens. And that really in many ways has been the way I've just trusted the process.
Yeah, I remember when that period of time when you came to Utah, because our church was just 20 miles or 30 miles away, and you and I worked together, and you really supported our new ministry, our new work in Ogden, Utah, and were just such an incredible mentor and friend and support that really helped us establish our board of directors and understand more about all of that. So thank you for being there for me and for our community.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor. I love what you've done.
Oh, thank you. And I remember when you were making that long commute, and I also remember when you actually moved to Utah, and wasn't there a horse involved?
Yes.
Yes. So
Yeah.
are you a horse lover?
Absolutely, yes.
So
Yeah.
tell me more about that, because I've never, like, horses intimidate me a bit. They're just such big creatures. And I know they pick up your energy. And so I'm always sort of aware. I do a little like auric cleanse when I go near a horse so it can't sense that I'm nervous. But I'm wondering, what has your relationship with horses, how has that supported you?
Oh my gosh. In my family, there's always been horses. I had cousins that raised quarter horses and that sort of thing. And when I grew up in outside Denver, Colorado, it was still pretty rural at that point. So there was always this huge field with these beautiful horses across the way. And I just always had sort of an affinity. But it really wasn't until that point in Idaho where we had a horse property and offered to let a couple of rescue horses come live with us. And again, saying yes. But I learned so much about intention, because horses are so sensitive. I mean, if you ever think about how horses run together full out as a herd, and all of a sudden they turn all at the same time. Well, somehow there's communication going on. And when it was worked with a trainer who'd always say, basically, it was never about training the horse, it was about training me. She's like, where's your intention? What are you doing? You know, because they do pick up the energy. And if you're frantic, they're like, oh my God, we're in danger. So I got to act out. And so over and over, it was like holding the intention and being clear in my own mind and in my own soul. And then the horse would just respond to that. So it was a wonderful experience to deepen my spiritual work through that. So
yeah, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking back to my childhood. I grew up in England and would take riding classes. We'd have ponies, not horses, and full English style, you know, hat and jodhpurs and all of that. And I would always get the horse that was misbehaving. I remember Pickles would always be nibbling at me, and yeah, and then one ran off with me one time. So I think, yeah, I know that they're reading my energy, and yeah, it's a delicate thing. And I can see that having that exposure as a young one, knowing that there's communication going on with other species, with each other. I didn't have that awareness. My family was not spiritual or religious or anything like that. So it was just very sort of surface. But it sounds like you developed a deeper connection or a deeper awareness that there are other energies or dimensions to life. And maybe that's supported you in becoming a tarot practitioner, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, I've always had a connection with the divine, whatever you want to call that. But what as a spiritual practitioner, I learned, to get centered, to get myself grounded in spirit, no matter what else was going on. And so that was a further lesson of being grounded when, when you're riding a horse, and it's like, if you freak out, the horse freaks out, because that's what they do as a herd animal. So to be in a situation and be able to find your center and be calm is a great gift. It's a great gift.
It is. Yeah, we always pull cards every morning, my husband and I and my daughter. and she's watching. Hi, Alex. And this morning, Michael, my husband, picked the horse from the animal medicine deck, and it speaks of power and that herd mentality and having a balanced medicine shield. It talks about in the that particular deck.
Yeah.
So when did you come into the world of the tarot? Was that something that showed up early in your days? I mean, if you're from a very religious family, that might have been seen as not such a helpful thing to be dabbling with.
Well, not as a kid. I remember as a kid, I was interested in ESP. I remember reading books about ESP, and as I said, our household was fairly liberal, although the church we went to was pretty conservative. But I didn't have any involvement with cards really until I started down the journey of spiritual practitioner. And even then, it was sort of discouraged. We were kind of taught to not do crystals and cards and astrology and all that stuff because power lies within. So, but I always, like everybody else, played with them on the side. And I always used little angel cards as part of classes. And, and I've had some decks and played with them, just, hobby. And I never really developed it. And part of what I realize now is because I was too scattered. I kept picking up new books and, a new deck and trying to figure, rather than just sitting with the one. And so it really, it's this during the pandemic, like all of us, I spent a lot of time on YouTube and, found a bunch of readers and was really started to help kind of understand the process. And then actually I remember one day we were having a conversation and I pulled some cards and I said, well, what do you think about this? And you're like, oh my God. And I was like, oh, that's how this works. And so shortly thereafter, I found my way through this Mindful Tarot program, which is a year-long study that I just completed yesterday. And that opened up this whole other chapter. And so I've loved the approach of Mindful Tarot because it's not, is he going to call kind of work? It's really about consciousness, which has been the through theme of my life. And then having the discipline and a year-long program of really studying and working with other students and developing. But then out of that came, because I fell in love with Joseph Campbell many years ago, kind of this coming together of these three worlds in a way.
Mm-hmm. So how has that worked for you? Meaning studying metaphysics. Well, let's just talk about metaphysics for a minute. How has that impacted your life? Having this deeper connection with the spiritual world, the physical world. What is it within metaphysics, and particularly science of mind, that has sort of come forward with you since you are no longer a pulpit minister? How has that teaching sort of come into your world and been very helpful and supportive in, putting your toe in the water of being a tarot practitioner and other things that you may have coming up?
So in many ways, science of mind saved my life. And I came out of a time of crisis, like many of our people that find their way to our centers do, because I was looking for a different way to do it. When I found an approach that was universal, talked about universal spiritual principles, and began to understand that there's a commonality between all the religious traditions, at an inner level, they all teach love and compassion and understanding, and they're different on the outer in terms of ritual and all that, but there's a common thread that runs through all. And so it taught me that my mind influenced my world, and that if I wanted to, because I grew up like a lot of people thinking that if I changed my circumstances, I would have a different experience of life. And yet what I found out was I was the same old miserable person wherever I went, because it was not about the apartment I was living in. It was about the body and the mind that I was living in. So that changed everything in terms of understanding the power of our consciousness to influence our surroundings, and that we're all at choice. The negative side of it, I will say, was I kind of realized that sometimes in the New Thought tradition, we are not comfortable dealing with the dark night, or the darkness, if as it were. Remember Matthew Fox talking at a conference one year, and he said, "Your philosophy is incomplete because you have no via negativa," and which is, and I was like, so a lot of times, well-meaning people. I remember a gal telling me that she had breast cancer. She was a spiritual practitioner. She knew the principles and all that. And she shared with me how when she went to her church, all the people, well-meaning people, were just like, let's just pray this away and let's do this and let's, and she said, I knew the principles. What I needed was presence. I needed compassion. I just needed my friends to be with me. And I think so often when people are in grief or they're in whatever, they don't need platitudes. They need compassion and presence. So what Joseph Campbell helped me understand was that we're all on a journey, and that throughout the ages, mythology has taught us that we go through a process, and once you see it everywhere. You start here, and then you cross a threshold, and you encounter challenges, and you get to have whatever the supreme lesson is. And on the other side of that is the gift. And what I found was, in understanding that, was you've got to go through whatever you're going through, so that you can embody the gift that lies on the other side. And often people would come to my office for prayer. Usually is that when they are being tested and tried, like, can we pray this away? And so I realized what we wanted to begin doing is pray for the courage and wisdom to move through the experience, to gain the fullness of the experience. I believe it's why we're here on this planet, to experience all of it. And so, it's all necessary in a way for our soul's evolution.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you were sharing that story of the person coming to you, I was thinking back. I had a similar experience when my youngest son, got ill at 10 years old. He was diagnosed with a 19.5-inch spinal cord tumor. And I was in practitioner training at the time. And I distinctly remember my team, my minister and the other practitioners, they were really standoffish. They would not come to the hospital. And granted, we lived up in the mountains in Big Bear Lake, Southern California, and the hospital was 50, 60 miles away down the mountain, so to speak. But so it was a bit of a trek, but it was more than that. They had sort of a disdain for being with the discomfort or the uncomfortable. And I really felt that was missing at that point, and sort of sparked in me this desire to create. So when my son came home and things were much easier, I started a spiritual growth group called Stepping Stones to Conscious Living. And this was my response to what I felt was lacking within our church community, a place where people could come and not sit and ruminate in the dark stories, but to feel seen, to feel acknowledged. Because I also saw, not only within our church, but within the greater New Thought communities at that time, and this was 20 something years ago, that there was that toxic positivity, that wanting to brush things under the the rug, so to speak, or even to say, make comments which would immediately shut people down, like, well, what is it within you that attracted this? So yeah, I think that there's been a lot of evolutionary steps and in consciousness that have helped New Thought sort of be more accepting of the shadow, of holding that space for individuals. And so the hero's journey, I'm really excited to dive into that. We will after the break, but before that, so when you thought about taking the tarot course during COVID, and you've had all this history and background and deep study and depth work in metaphysics and science of mind, New Thought, and the hero's journey, was there a like a light bulb moment that it all clicked in together, or was that like a slow coming to integrating those three philosophies, if you will, into what you're now working on?
Yeah, so it was through the class early on, the teacher began speaking about the hero's journey and understanding that. I was like, oh, I know a little bit about that. In fact, I found an old flyer the other day from 2002 in Santa Fe at a workshop I did. So I've been working with the material for a while. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I shared some things, and I already had sort of a diagram and all that sort of thing. And literally the spread that I'm using came to me in a dream. And I was like, oh, and then it's sort of evolved, and I keep getting little pieces to it, but it's mostly all I feel like it's come to me. I'd love to say, oh, I'm so wonderful and smart, and, but it really is just, and again, just trusting that process that in a dream, I just saw it, and then I started playing with it. And then this idea of tarot's journeys evolved, and it was just kind of the melding of the work of tarot with the work of Joseph Campbell, with the work of consciousness.
Beautiful. Well, I can't wait to hear more about it. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with Tara Jones and Marty Bacher.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hefferland Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Kitchener, Unity Spiritual Center Ottawa, Om Center for Spiritual Living, Satya Center, Begin Within Ministries, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and the Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for being part of the New Thought Media Network. Please like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.
People of African Descent New Thought Group proudly presents Celebrating Our Soul, Consciously Creating Change at Unity Village, Thursday, August 1st through Sunday, August 4th, some of our greatest keynote speakers, some of our finest musicians and vocalists, some of our amazing and experienced panelists, and some of our fabulous masterclass presenters will be there for you at Celebrating Our Soul, Consciously Creating Change at Unity Village this summer. Regular registration ends June 30th, so don't delay. Register today at padntg.com. Sponsorship opportunities are available at padntg.com. Volunteer opportunities are available at padntg.com. Go there now, padntg.com. See you there.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth. To live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge. On the growing edge.
And now, here's Allie.
Welcome back. And I would love to know about when someone comes to your website, and we've seen a few images of that. It's a beautiful website, by the way, and it invites you to explore this hero's journey, this spread that you do as a tarot practitioner to support people in their evolution, in their healing, and whatever they're coming for. So can you explain a little bit about who's your client, or who is the person that is and not who, but what kind of people would be interested in this, and what's your intention? What do they take away from an experience with you in exploring this tarot spread?
Well, I prefer my clients be human, but I'm open to other options. No, who I think it's a seeker. It's always a seeker, right? The type of, tarot can be used in many ways, and some do predictive tarot, and that's not what I do. I'm specifically interested in this aspect of consciousness, and I think the cards have a way, as you're talking about, pulling a card in the morning and giving you insight for the day. It's that insight that tarot represents, to me, this evolution of the soul, and so it gives you a way to have insight into yourself. And I've done a fair amount of pastoral counseling over the years. And one of the benefits of tarot is it impersonalizes it. I use the example of when my nephew was young, and sometimes he'd misbehave. And so I'd say, okay, we're going to have to get Barney, and we're going to have a conversation. And I put him on one knee and Barney on the other knee. And, and it sort of, rather than getting in his face and saying, it was sort of like, oh, we're just going to have this conversation with Barney. And so the tarot is Barney for adults. But you can see in the sometimes it allows us to look outside of ourselves at an image to understand the inside of ourselves, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a specific demographic that but it's people that are spiritually aware enough. What I find is a lot of times people, as I said, people come to your office and they're like, pray this way. And it's like, well, let's understand where you are. For me, in this particular model, I often, go back up for a second. You talked about that question of what's in your consciousness that's creating this. The worst question ever, because but I found myself in that. I'm a person that suffered through depression most of my life, but I felt like I was doing consciousness wrong rather than just having a condition. So in looking at how to, I'm sorry, I kind of got stuck there. So when we get, it helps to know that sometimes things aren't about consciousness. Like if you're a gardener and you're in Ogden, Utah, I don't care what high consciousness you have as a gardener, planting in winter does not work, and it has nothing to do with you or consciousness. It's the season we're in. So in being in Ecclesiastes, it says unto everything there is a season. So for me, the ability to look at the heroic journey as a way of seeing, oh, here's where I am. Let me approach this aspect of my life just as I would approach the season that I'm in life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So what I'm sensing, and you and I have actually had a session, and I've been blessed to work through this spread with Marty, with you, and so we'll explore that in a minute. But the fact that there's seasons that we're going through, and when we're in the winter, yeah, we're not going to try and pickaxe the frozen soil to plant some seeds in that. And so there's different gifts that come by honoring the seasons that we're in. And so let's talk a little bit about this spread. I know that there's 10 cards that you select in. Why don't you explain that? How do you go about working with someone when you're doing a practitioner session, a tarot practitioner session?
So I kind of do it in advance. I like to, we set up the time, we do that, and then I send out some materials. And if somebody's familiar with tarot and they have a card that resonates with them, then I use that as the seeker card. Otherwise, I just intuitively select, usually from the major arcana, which is the first 21 cards of the tarot deck. And that's just an intuitive process. Then I set intention, and then I will do the spread. I'll pull the cards, and then I like to have a day or so to be with it, because as you know, a lot of stuff happens when I'm asleep. I'm most effective when I'm asleep. And so then that gives me time to kind of look at it, and I don't. It just gives me insight, but it's not until we actually have the conversation that I really get to discover. Like sometimes you're like, this makes no sense, but then in the conversation, people are, oh my God, that's exactly right. I can absolutely see why it's there. And so we just walk through the process, and then it becomes more of a conversation of the insights. And so it's collaborative, and I love that.
Yeah, it sounds like it, and it felt like when we did it, it's collaborative, it's very intuitive, and it's happening in that moment. So it's a dynamic process that the three of us, so to speak, you, the practitioner, me, the client, or the one taking the journey, and then the actual journey. Like, so there's these three parts to what's happening, and we're all sort of interplaying, interrelating, interconnected in that moment, that session, whether it takes 45 minutes or an hour, whatever it takes. We explore each step of the way, and just knowing that seeker card, that first card, and I think for me it was the Magician, and I need to do a bit more diving into my own spread so I can really mine the gold from it, because I don't, even though it's a dynamic, alive thing that's happening in the now moment as you're offering this session, it's also something that you can, the client can draw from later on or journal on. And so let's start with number one, the seeker. That's a particular character from this this tarot deck, and this character that's selected either intuitively or by your client, it has particular traits and qualities and characteristics and gifts, wisdom. So that in and of itself is something to consider. And so let's start there and then move on to card number 2. And for those of you that are watching, you can see the spread. Card number 1 is the Seeker, and then card number 2 is the Ordinary World, I believe.
Correct. So in the hero's journey, and I always like to say hero is a generic term like actor or doctor or whatever. It's not gender based. But our hero or heroine is living their life. A lot of times I'll use the example of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz because we all know the story. But, you know, you're living your ordinary life. And in Dorothy's case, she's living in black and white Kansas. And, you know, then it moves to the call to the adventure. And there's 2 ways the call to adventure happens, either external or internal. So external can be a tornado, moves your house, or it can just be that divine discontent, that inner longing, that sense that there's something more to my life and I must find out what it is. Think about the great parable of the prodigal son. At home says, give me my fortune. I'm going to go live my life, and then finds themselves eventually in the supreme ordeal, because if you're a Jewish boy feeding pigs, it's not good. And there's a message in there that says, and then he came to himself and realized even my father's servants live better than this life. I'll go home. So that's a very simple, quick, heroic journey, but there always involves that element of leaving home or leaving the life.
So they get that call to adventure in some way, shape, or form.
Right. And I should say, this is just my version. Campbell has more. You can find people that have like 20 points. And, you know, I like to keep things simple because I have a simple mind. And so, and then, so usually early on in the adventure, there is what is card number 4, which I call the supernatural aid or mentor. If you think about Star Wars, and Luke meets this strange little green person, Yoda, who's, you know, there to help him. In Dorothy's case, she receives a gift of these shoes, but really doesn't understand the symbolic or the significance of that gift. So that's why I put the supernatural aid sort of, I think of it sort of like being angel on the shoulder, because it's often that later in the journey that we really draw on that. You know, Luke learns about trusting the Force early on, but then as the story gets better, it's really about trusting the Force, right? So then as we move forward, there's a point of crossing the threshold of like, now it's on. In some mythological terms, there's an entrance. And if you think about when you cross a threshold, you enter into a new dimension. Sometimes I think of it like the underworld. And so there's a commitment there. Then we find ourselves on the road of trials. And this is why we love movies and mythology and legend and all this stuff, because we want our hero to be tested, right? They've got to overcome something or embrace something. Now, when it's our own life, we can kind of think it sucks, right? Like,
when it's actually happening, yeah.
And that's when they show up in your office saying, let's pray this away. But I say, no, let us, you know, you're being tested. And in my humble opinion, it's why we're here on the planet, having a human body. We're spiritual beings having this human experience. And that's part of why we're here. So let us gain the wisdom, the skills, whatever necessary as we move through this road of trials. At every point, there comes what we call the supreme ordeal. And the supreme ordeal is not the magnitude of the event. It's the moment when we come face to face with ourselves, or when we surrender to the process. And when I use the term surrender, I don't mean giving up, I mean opening up.
Mm.
I often use the example of Jesus in the garden. That's the supreme ordeal. It's not the crucifixion. It's the moment in the garden of surrender to this unfolding story. That's on the other side, he finds the Christ, correct? So once we allow ourselves to go through that and gain what our insight when we die to one way of being and born to a new way of being, Jesus talked about being born again. And death and resurrection is in mythology over and over and over. And then the tarot cards as well, that we're dying to one way of being and so that a new way of being. So we find the gift or the reward, and then we make the choice to return home. And sometimes that involves its own return threshold and crossing that. So that when we return home, we now are living not as the person that left home, but we're achieving mastery of two worlds.
Mm.
So in my way of thinking, I believe that we're spiritual human beings. Some people identify more with the humanness and they're not any spiritual good. And some people identify more with the spiritual and may not be any human good. But to me, it's about finding that balance of how do I live in this physical realm and keep my spiritual essence. And that's the walk, isn't it? For many of us, of like, don't be dismayed by the conditions of the world, but keep your light shining and move through it. And so you see this pattern unfolding over and over and over. And so when what I've appreciated about this is when we can start to see our life as not as my life, but as my story, this journey that I'm on, this opportunity that I can be a choice at any stage of this, that there's supernatural help available if I draw upon it, then it allows me to move through the process with more grace and ease.
Beautiful. So two things are coming up for me, like your own hero's journey, and then maybe you could share some insights, because I know that you've done, years of sitting with people and probably bringing in some of this philosophy of the hero's journey, and you've been working with clients in offering this spread, and I'm wondering, can you share some of the some highlights or some insights about people's working this spread, working their own journey, coming to some of these, they're not all thresholds, but that's one of the words, card number 5, crossing the threshold, call to adventure, that's a sort of another threshold you cross. So can you share some of the, either your own story of the hero's journey and how this has been significant to you, or maybe some people that you've been working with, without breaking any confidences, obviously, but to give us some insight into how significant it is to slow down and really do this inner work.
Right. So let me tell you about this crazy woman I worked with named Allie.
Oh no!
Let me pull it up on screen. No, I'm kidding. No, it's I think for me, again, I found myself sort of indoctrinated. Nobody said it, but into this, like, if I could just change my consciousness, whatever that meant, I wouldn't be experiencing what I'm experiencing. The work helps me understand that perhaps I have a soul contract that I often tell people that the way I got into ministry was by trying to outrun a police officer while drunk. Now there were several steps that happened but it was like I was out of my mind crazy at one point because I had no tools to deal with grief. And I had a significant, my partner at the time died at 23 and I had no idea what to do with that. So I didn't know how or what to do that. So I, partied and tried to make it go away. Now, I only share that story, not because I'm proud of it, but because it informed everything else I ever did. So I don't care who you are. When you show up in my office, it's like, I got no judgment. And I would not be the person I am today. I would not be the minister I am today. I would not be the spiritual teacher and seeker that I am today had I not gone through that experience. Now, I don't think Billy died so that I could have this experience, but he was on my life path. And it was a significant, life was all happy and fun. And then one day it changed. And so now I think, so when you can start to see that if you're in a human body on this planet Earth, you're going to have to deal with some stuff. It's what you signed up for. So when you accept, this is what I signed up for, you didn't have to accept the call. You didn't have to cross the threshold, but now you're in it. So how about we look at what skills can I develop as I'm being tested, as I'm moving through this? What do I need to surrender to? And often what we have to surrender to is our own divine magnificence.
Mm.
I can't tell you, myself included, how many times we try and carry that limited way of thinking through our lives. In fact, some of us that move into ministry and counseling and all that sort of thing are all working to heal our wounds, right? But when you can surrender to who you are truly, and then see this as just an experience you're having on the journey, then something magical happens. So I think it can be a tool for you to redefining trauma or recontextualizing. I just feel like I'm scratching the surface of what the potentiality is here. And so I'm just going to keep sharing what I share and listening to what I'm listening to and seeing where it takes me.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think of that return home, that number 9. And yeah, we've gone through this call, this ordeal, the wire brushing, my husband calls it. I call it being pulled through the hedge backwards. Life can really present us with a lot. And on this return home, after you've faced your fears, you've done some looking within, you've surrendered maybe to your own magnificence, then there's a coming home, coming back into the world. And I think this final card, Mastery of Two Worlds, there's this, and for me, I'm thinking of it's our ego and our essence kind of coming together in a very peaceful and authentically powerful way that we're better equipped. It's not to say I'm guessing that we can have several go-arounds of this hero's journey. It's not like one happens when we're in our 20s and then boom, it's over. It's all downhill. Life is but a dream after that.
Right.
That, it comes and goes.
Yeah, and you can see that journey over and over and over. We enter at different phases in our life. Every time we cross a threshold, like you get married, that's a new threshold. There's a whole process of being married. I hate to burst everybody's bubble, but it's not you live happily ever after because now you're married. It's there's some stuff that's going to happen when you have a child, when your children all leave the home and now you have an empty home. There's thresholds throughout our life that kind of this cycle plays out. And so they don't all have to be major. I've had 3 that I can think of major tower moments when it all fell apart. But I also that's my strength card, because I always know when it falls apart, it comes back together. Mm-hmm. If I'll trust what I know and the power that is greater than I am.
Beautiful. So we're just about at the end of our time together. And I always ask my guests this question. So you've heard of the song, What the World Needs Now is Love, Sweet Love. And here at the Growing Edge, and the growing edge really signifies that growing edge of our own becoming. And so collectively, humanity is on the edge, the growing edge. And when you look out at the world at the moment, you get a sense of your inner world. What would you say from this growing edge perspective that the world needs now, aside for love, which can never
I
be?
already got that. I think we need compassion and understanding. I think, the biggest problem I see right now is we want to vilify each other. And we're just all on a different journey. And we're all going through whatever we're going through. So the more each of us can do to uplift ourselves and the lives of others around us, that's how we make a better world. And the darkness that shows up in our world is actually here to teach us. It's our shadow will continue to show up personally until we learn to deal with it. Our shadow collectively will continue to show up until we collectively learn to deal with it. So the greatest gift I think we can give each other right now is compassion, to be present with another.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed not only our entire journey together for the last many years, but this new chapter for you, this Tarot Journeys, and seeing your light be fanned, your flame be fanned even brighter through this course that you've just ended yesterday. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And for this beautiful new venture into supporting people to take a deeper look, to take some time to examine these different chapters or phases or parts of the journey that we're all on individually and we're all on collectively. And I trust and know that you will touch the lives of many with this beautiful new vision that you're casting and the guidance that you give just by being there. You truly are a light and a support and a guide. Well, you have been for me, and I know you have been for many, many others. So thank you so much, Marty. I appreciate you and love you very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you and love you very much. And I love what you're doing. And I will, as always, support you fully in your becoming.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. I love you. And I will see you next week with my guest, Cerise Patron. And don't be a stranger. Come back, share this episode with your friends, and tell them about the hero's journey and the tarot journey that Reverend Marty Bacher is sharing with the world starting today. So peace and blessings, lots of love to you, and I'll see you next week.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth, to live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge.